Rick and Morty was once on the verge of becoming a cultural phenomenon. On the back of its absolutely rabid fanbase and heavy meme culture, the explosive growth and popularity the show experienced in its first 2 seasons seemingly put it on a trajectory to fast displace The Simpsons, Family Guy, and South Park as the king of animated sitcoms for the new generation. But while Rick and Morty has at least crossed the threshold from cult hit into mainstream recognition, the hype train has hit the brakes hard, and the show's popularity may actually be decreasing. Not just in ratings, but fan perception, with most saying that the show has been getting progressively worse since Season 3, and Season 5 just becoming the most widely disliked season so far, with many of its episodes being rated among the worst in the show's history. So what happened? Well, what we're seeing play out is what happens when a show doesn't understand its own formula for success. Rick and Morty broke out because of its fresh style of humor, a one-of-a-kind blend of comedic innovations not seen in any other animated series or sitcoms in general. And as of Season 5, it seems to have completely forgotten what that brand of comedy looks like. Rick and Morty can still make great episodes when it gets serious and delves into its lore. The problem is the other 90% of episodes that are supposed to make viewers laugh, where the show is going through a comedic crisis. So today I'm going to break down how a show with even as meteoric a rise as Rick and Morty can waste that initial wave of popularity by failing to consistently deliver on what made it appealing in the first place. And to demonstrate how this change occurred, we have to first understand the 4 factors that made Rick and Morty initially stand out from any other comedy out there, before getting into the mess it has become today. First was the show's semi-improvisational style.
Yeah! That's my new thing. I'm kind of like, what's his name? Arsenio. That's what Arsenio used to say on his show.
This was especially strong in Season 1. And it's really not just stuttering and burping, a lot of full scenes of dialogue play out that are largely improvised, because it's just Justin Roiland having fun talking to himself, voicing both Rick and Morty. But what makes it work is not just the fact that some dialogue is improvised, it's the style in which it's done, where we are deliberately made to feel that these interactions are a little crude and awkwardly made up on the spot. It's the sweet spot where Rick and Morty's not exactly breaking the fourth wall, but we get this sort of wink-wink, nudge-nudge sense that they are just BSing some dialogue together on the fly, that creates a really offbeat comedic tone in general that feels very distinct.
Old lady science, she's a real, you gotta hang on tight, because she bucks pretty hard.
It's like they're half-assing this bit on purpose, but the fact that they're not trying to hide the fact that they're half-assing it makes it a joke on its own. This sense that they really didn't give a because the show was so confident in its own comedy extends to a lot of their approach to absurdist humor as well. A lot of Rick and Morty's absurd concepts are funny precisely because of how deliberately lazy these concepts could be. This half-bird, half-person shows up and his name is Bird Person. A character named Squanchy shows up who asks if he can squanch. It's not even the sense that this is so dumb it's funny, which other shows do as well, rather it's almost as though it's so lazily thought out that it's funny, and the viewer is in on the joke with the writers.
It's called Two Brothers. Two Brothers. It's just called Two Brothers.
But isn't Rick and Morty supposed to be smart? Well, that's also true. And this is where the high IQ memes come in. Yes, as cringy as it's become to say, a big appeal was that Rick and Morty also had a lot of really sharp bits of dialogue, one-liners, and observations. A lot of that presumably coming from Dan Harmon as one of the best in the business, bringing that similar style of writing from Community over. And with the character of Rick, Dan finally had the perfect vehicle to voice his most aggressive opinions.
Listen, I'm not the nicest guy in the universe. Because I'm the smartest, and being nice is something stupid people do to hedge their bets.
And I don't think you'll find another animated sitcom character that can pull off as cutting, brutally articulate tirades as Rick. So yes, the show's writing stood out as smart, but really it's the brilliant combination of the fast-paced, snappy, and frequently quote-unquote intelligent dialogue with the previously mentioned half-assed, lazy, improvised, and absurd style of comedy that made for this one-of-a-kind concoction of a show that could freely alternate between incredibly witty and deliberately stupid. And speaking of which, since we're following a main character who has seen countless realities and timelines, the show could take a very cavalier attitude towards life and existence, repeatedly stopping just short of saying nothing really matters and producing some extremely dark comedic moments in the process. So again, we get this tremendous range where Rick and Morty can run the full gamut of really silly, goofy, absurdist humor one moment, but then swing to heavy black comedy the next. Like say, the main characters literally destroying the world as they know it, leaving behind everyone they know and love to die, and instead switching to a reality where they themselves are dead. And this is my personal favorite aspect of Rick and Morty. So many great comedies excel at creating a spiral of events, where small events at the beginning of the episode snowball into something much crazier and unexpected by the end. But because Rick and Morty is a science fiction universe where literally anything goes, often the initial starting point in the first place is a pretty imaginative and unique concept on its own, that can then ramp up into some absolutely hilarious conceptual rabbit holes that you don't get anywhere else. For example, Rick creating an entire universe just to exploit its people to charge his car battery is really funny on its own. But to then find out he's not getting any power because a scientist in that universe made another universe to exploit, but that universe is already working on making another universe to exploit, creating a cycle of no one getting to properly exploit the universes they create, is an absolutely inspired comedic setup that you will only get in Rick and Morty. We see this format done well so many times throughout the first couple seasons. Even this brief pizza couch phone gag that isn't really a problem snowballing into bigger problems is still just a great example of a conceptually creative little rabbit hole we get to briefly go down that again, you would only see in Rick and Morty. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this single gag is better written comedy than all of Season 5. So to recap, when Rick and Morty first broke out, it was thanks to its semi-improvised style, extremely sharp dialogue, nihilistic approach, and spiraling sci-fi conceptual trains. No other animated sitcom had any of these individual traits to the same degree, and no sitcom in general had the full package. This show was something special that we had never seen before. But at the same time, such a layered comedic package raised a unique complication. First of all, when there are this many dimensions to what makes a show funny, it's hard to replicate what fans want over and over. And that's completely ignoring other non-comedic elements that were developing that some fans wanted more of, such as Evil Morty or more character exploration of Rick. Second, the core writers who created this complex package were ready to hand it off after only 20 episodes. By Season 3, many of the original writers were gone, and by Season 5, it's almost all different writers than the first 2 seasons. And I don't blame the new writers of Rick and Morty at all, because they were simply handed a show with an extremely hot start that seems to be finding comedic success for a variety of reasons, and without the original writers even waiting a few seasons to make sure they themselves can consistently replicate this full comedic package, the show is already trying to hand it off to a bunch of new people and basically saying, recreate this. So let's look at what happened. To start with, have you noticed how nearly all the semi-improvisational, deliberately half-assed style of dialogue is gone? Season 1 had it the most, Season 2 a bit less, Season 3 it's still there, just significantly less frequent now, no full episodes of interdimensional cable anymore, that's for sure. Season 4 you can find a few clips, and Season 5 it's practically non-existent. Yes, you can still find moments of Morty stuttering and such, but the general laid-back, openly nonchalant, who gives a approach to making up some bits of dialogue are just gone. And you can give some reasons like, well, Morty is a lot more confident now, so it makes sense he doesn't awkwardly fumble for words as much, and that's a fine explanation, but that doesn't change the fact that an original staple of the show's comedic style is now missing. What it's actually swung towards is being almost too tightly scripted in the pursuit of appearing smart all the time. Nowadays, it feels like the writers think that smart humor means trying to stuff in as many jokes into as many convoluted dialogue chains as possible. I like fast-paced humor, and there are plenty of scenes where the quick back and forths build on each other really well to bring things to a strong punchline. But so much of Rick and Morty dialogue now feels like it's trying to be fast-paced for the sake of being fast-paced, with no regard to how weak or strong the jokes are, or giving some jokes space to land. And I feel like in a further attempt to make the dialogue smart, the writers are trying to make every single line a sharp zinger. Characters barely talk anymore, rather conversations feel like an endless stream of attempted roasts, one pseudo-clever response after another.
When did that stop being a parent's wettest dream?
I guess around the time our family created a giant incest baby and the government launched it into space.
We get the family we get, not the one we want. And if you want to keep the one you got, get your asses into some anime spacesuits.
And again, yes, earlier seasons did have back and forths like that, but the show picked its spots more, whereas now that's just the default style of dialogue. And while the dialogue suffers from trying too hard to be smart, the general episode concepts suffer from no longer trying to be smart. It feels like the writers are now opting to just throw things at the wall rather than letting a creative concept organically spiral into something crazy. For instance, in Season 1, Morty needs a love potion, so Rick gives him Essence of Vol, but that makes everyone obsess over Morty. So then Rick makes Essence of Mantis, which do the reverse and make everyone hate Morty, but instead turns everyone into monsters. So then Rick makes Essence of Koala plus Rattlesnake plus Chimp plus Cactus plus Shark plus Dog plus Dinosaur, but that just turns everyone into super duper monsters, so then Rick just packs up and moves to a new reality to forget about the whole thing. Yes, it gets crazy, it gets absurd, but it's all in the flow of one conceptually creative spiral, which is what makes it so funny. But now, spiraling out of control for Rick and Morty often just means as much random stuff as possible. Giant sperm monsters, and then there's also horse people, and then there's also an incest baby. Rick tries to turn into a turkey to make the president pardon him, but then they both turn into turkeys, and then that stuff doesn't really matter because then they're both humans, and now it's actually turkeys that are taking over the world, and then there's also ancient alien races of pilgrims and Indians. Being random for the sake of being random isn't that funny. And in the past, even when Rick and Morty got really random, it was a slow progression of a concept. And yes, you can still occasionally find great episodes from Season 4 and 5 that do these conceptually creative spirals really well. My point is simply that these episodes are becoming far more few and far between. Now lastly, the dark, nihilistic humor. I think Rick and Morty can still be good at this, but it's starting to slip, as the first problem is after countless episodes seeing senseless violence, genocide, and repeated deaths of versions of the main characters, it has to keep upping the bar to shock us. But the bigger issue is that a lot of the darker comedic beats simply can't hit as hard now that the characters' morals are so off the charts. There was definitely a time Summer would have cared that an entire planet was going to die. There was definitely a time Morty would never have killed innocent aliens for fun. You kind of need more morally balanced characters to at least act as straight men, so that when Rick sells weapons to a murderer so that he can play arcade games, there is someone to freak out about it. And sure, you can say this is just character evolution, but if the purpose of the show is to make people laugh, then if you evolve every character to become as nihilistic as Rick, then what are we even laughing at anymore? So maybe you still find the show funny, and that's fine, but if you want to pretend it's the same old show, no, there are clearly observable trends of the show's original comedic strengths not being written in the same way as before. Not to mention some aspects of Rick and Morty's comedic style that weren't really its strengths have definitely been amplified, such as its crass humor. More cursing, more gross-out jokes, more sex jokes, etc. And yes, it's true that this stuff has always been a part of Rick and Morty from Season 1, but using this to argue that the show is still just as good as it once was makes no sense, because there's a difference between saying the show has always had this element versus saying this element was always one of the best parts of the show. I don't think anyone ever watched Rick and Morty specifically because it had crass humor, the way, like, dozens of other animated sitcoms already have. Sure, this humor could be funny at times, but it was never one of Rick and Morty's biggest unique strengths. So nowadays, if we're getting less of this and more of this, you're right in that this was always technically Rick and Morty, but it wasn't necessarily the part that made the show special, and was probably better in moderation rather than a full episode about sperm or an incest baby. The good news is that Rick and Morty still puts out occasionally great episodes, but it's unfortunate that it feels like now we have to wait for lore-based episodes to get true classics, rather than the first two seasons where we could just trust this animated comedy to be consistently funny. Still, some newer episodes give me hope that the writers can recapture the old formula. The show is not so far removed from its former glory that it's too late to right the ship. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe for more videos every Saturday.